All right, today we have another episode from the archives with one of my incredible guests. Enjoy. Welcome to the Trauma Therapist Podcast, a show about the incredible people dedicated to helping those who've experienced trauma. My name is Guy McPherson, and my mission is to raise the awareness of trauma and to inspire each of us to help those around us. Welcome to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. My name is Guy McPherson, and this is the podcast where we interview master trauma therapists from all over the world to learn about what inspires them and the steps they've taken to become masters in their field. If you're a trauma therapist, if you're interested in trauma therapy, or if you're simply interested in helping other people, this is it. Today, I'm so excited to introduce my guest, Staci Haines. Staci, are you ready?
I'm ready. Thank you, Guy, for having me.
You are welcome. All right, so Staci is the developer of generative somatics and the somatics and trauma courses. Her work emerges from the somatics tradition of Richard Strozzi Heckler, integrating polarity therapy, Gestalt, Vipassana meditation, and Aikido. Staci is a senior teacher in the field of somatics and leads courses in somatics and leadership, somatics and trauma, as well as somatics and social justice. We're going to be talking about all that today. In addition, she's the founder of Generation 5, a social justice organization, and also the author of Healing Sex, a mind-body approach to healing sexual trauma. All right, Staci, just a bit about you, really on the professional side, but kind of start off, tell us, a little bit about you personally, where you're located, and then we'll jump in.
Excellent. All right. Well, thanks for having me. I have been in the field of somatics. I'm going on 19 years now. And like you said, I do, over those 19 years, have done a substantial amount of one-on-one work, healing groups work, and now do a lot of training, both training of other practitioners and therapists, and then training in somatics and trauma of folks who do social change work. I am located these days in Oakland, California, which is where our offices are too. And probably an important thing to say about me personally, because this will tie in, is I actually grew up high in the Rockies of Colorado. And anytime we talk about somatics or we talk about trauma, at some point we really want to talk about resilience and the resilience we pull on to get through traumatic experiences. And growing up in those mountains where nature was much bigger than people continues to be a big source of resilience, and also just something that really, in a funny way, also informs my work.
I love that. So growing up in the Rockies where nature is bigger than people, that's very powerful. And I'm really curious, as I'm sure our listeners will be, to hear about how that plays out for you in the work you do. So let's kind of transition and, in our kind of pre-recording chat here, we talked about a quote or whatever, but share with us, Staci, if there's a quote, if there's a mantra, something that's, driven you in this field. This podcast really is about getting to know you and really what's inspired you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Well, two things really come to mind. One is, this is kind of a quote and a saying out of the somatics field, and it goes like this. We are what we practice, or we become what we practice. We're always practicing something. Is what we're practicing deeply aligned with what we care about and who we are? That's a real guide in how I kind of look at people, look at the world, and also understand this work and how we continue to grow. And another one, and I have to say this goes all the way back to some of my own healing and transformation that I was doing in my earlier days. But it is that we are more powerful than whatever has happened to us. And I find that deeply inspiring, especially in the face of human resilience. Kind of blows my mind, really. The people that I've worked with, any of us in the field of trauma, the range. It ranges into the worst human behavior, and people surviving and sustaining some things that you think are not survivable. And it is so beautiful to me, and also I have a lot of respect for humans' capacity to transform and be resilient through very, very difficult and awful experiences. So we are more powerful than what happened to us. To me, just says we have more aliveness, hope, and resilience than some of the worst things people can do to each other.
So, yeah, two really good quotes there. Thanks so much. So the first one was, we become what we practice, kind of paraphrasing there. And the second one, we're more powerful than what's happened to us. And when did that latter, the second one there, become resonant for you? When did that become something that, was charged for you?
Yeah. So I really started doing my own focused healing in my 20s. So I'm a survivor of child sexual abuse. And I also grew up in a family as well as a community where there was a lot of domestic violence. And I think by the time I started learning that was not the norm, or didn't have to be the norm, and that there was something really inside of me, both as struggling with symptoms of those experiences, feeling disconnected from people, feeling more depressed, feeling compartmentalized, right? All those things that we have words for now that I didn't really have words for then, feeling afraid a lot. Generalized. Once I started getting into my own healing and feeling that there was something kind of pushing from inside of me toward healing, it's a very scary step when what there is to confront are very, very difficult experiences or traumatic experiences. But it became very live for me in my 20s that innate push for healing was actually going to be more powerful than the things I had to confront and face and work my way through. And what's funny about this moment too, it's funny, my youngest daughter right now, who's 20, is writing a biography for one of her courses. And I feel very honored she decided to write it on me, which has just elicited amazing conversations between us that we haven't had yet. And one thing I shared with her is how important it was for me that I started doing my own healing while I was also learning about things like feminism. And what I learned is that people had been really standing up for human rights, standing up for the full dignity and full value of all human beings long before I came around. And in many ways, I was a beneficiary of them saying, we're more powerful than what happened to us, and there's a bigger vision we can all work for together. So there's a way that social consciousness and my own personal healing commingled and in some ways co-supported each other, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And thank you so much for sharing that. I mean, that's just so powerful. And I think, we kind of started out our discussion before we were recording here about the different focuses in your life and how they might come together in this podcast. And I think it's just there's naturally, you can see how these paths have, to use your word, commingled. And also, Staci, you can hear the intensity and the passion in your voice coming through. I'm just picturing those Rocky Mountains, in the background there. Seriously, but it's very powerful, and I love the way you put it. You said there was this innate push for healing that just came through, and that is just so powerful. So thank you. And honestly, when you were talking about your daughter and the book she was writing and the conversations that's elicited, I kind of got goosebumps, honestly, because that's intense stuff. So awesome. Thanks so much.
Absolutely.
So let's kind of shift gears a little, talked a little bit about what got you here. Let's kind of move into a specialization, but more specifically, what got you into this field of trauma? People get into this field for a variety of reasons. I often talk about my inspiration. One of my huge inspirations was my brother coming back from the special forces from Iraq with PTSD wanting to find out what he did and just pushed him and nudged him, and my God, I just screwed it up. And, this was a while ago, but I wanted to come back and fix that, correct that, if you will. So, Staci, share with us a story about how you got into this field, this specialization.
Yeah. Such an interesting question because there's so many answers to it. I'm going to start young. I think like many kids, I was one of those kids where I hated things to be unfair. I just didn't like it, and I wanted things to be fair. And I also think growing up witnessing domestic violence, there was a way that I, and again, you might just call this again that innate desire to heal. But I remember watching my parents and I thought, there just has to be a different way. This doesn't seem right. And so I think that was just in there from an early age, which I just think is a natural empathy that, sometimes we get trained out of, but I think is really in us. And then when I really started focusing on, okay, this is the direction I'm going to go, really the main impulse was I just really wanted to decrease suffering. And I didn't like seeing suffering in nature. I didn't like seeing suffering in people. I didn't like seeing suffering in my family. And the more I studied, the more I thought, well, what is driving so much of this is people reenacting the hurts that happen to them. And that can be both for survivors of violence, and that can also be for people who are perpetrating violence. So much of it is a certain reenactment. And so I think that, along with my own seeing how much my life changed when I engaged in starting to heal from my own trauma, got me very, very passionate about the potential of healing. And healing going beyond, like, people are less anxious or less depressed, but healing being much more holistic, like the people we can be in our families, in our workplaces, and in our communities really, really changes when we get access to doing our own transformative work. So I really saw the ripple effects, I think, and that inspired me. I was also fortunate. I had a good friend get into what at the time was called Lomi School, which is a somatics training school. And she raved about it, and she kept saying, you should take it, you should go. And I remember it was 35 days of training in 1 year. It was a very intensive training. But about halfway through, the trainers at the time were Richard Strozzi Heckler and Robert Hall. But Richard was doing a demonstration with a person in the room who was the person I was convinced was not going to change, was not going to heal. And I saw him do a piece of trauma work with that man that just blew my mind. And at our graduation, at the end of the year, his wife came. And his wife said, listen, I don't know what happened here this year, but I want to tell you about the husband he's become and the grandfather he's become and the boss he's become, because they had a family-run business. And she basically did this testimonial about the ripples of what him doing that healing work had done for their entire family and family-owned business. And then I was pretty much sold. I'm like, I'm in. So.
Wow. What an awesome story. I mean, I remember hearing about the Lomi School a while ago, and as you were mentioning that, I was thinking to myself that was Richie Strozzi Heckler. But what an inspiring kind of pathway and journey, Staci. Just from the beginnings, you're talking about as a young kid, just hated you wanted things to be unfair, and then just being in that cauldron of domestic violence and wanting things to change. And I love the way you kind of juxtapose or kind of maybe articulate the healing that goes on an individual basis, and you kind of juxtapose that with the healing that goes on in a more social basis, and how those two are different, how they're similar. That's very powerful. And I'm guessing that's the work you're doing, and that's very profound. So we'll talk about that. So before we do, let's kind of move in to a clinical error. We've talked a little bit about your journey, what got you into this field. Now, Staci, let's focus on an early clinical error you made and what you kind of gleaned from that, what you learned from that, if you will.
Yeah, that's good. I so appreciate you asked this question because, of course, any of us who are, clinicians, practitioners, healers, whatever folks call themselves, we're human beings too, and we're learning and growing along the way and making mistakes. And I just really appreciate you really normalizing that.
Oh, wow, thank you.
And one of the things that I did early on, and I think, you know how people can lean into being maybe too much of a pessimist or too much of an optimist. My leaning was being an unbalanced optimist. And one of the things that happened early on is I took on a very, very complex client, and actually more complex than my competence was at the time. And, heartfelt, wanted to help, had good training, all of that. But inside of it, what was really presenting was a combination of she wasn't living in a safe environment, so she wasn't physically safe. She had been in and out of drug use in a way that where she was managing her own symptoms in a way that was not good for her or the people around her. And fundamentally, she wasn't stabilized enough to enter into really the core of her trauma work. And the mistake I made, because with people who are more resilient or resource or stable, this works, but I didn't make the right assessment with her, is I moved us into some of the core wounding and the core of her trauma faster than I should have. And inside of that, it was destabilizing for her instead of transformative for her. And, I did a bunch to clean up my errors and get the right resources in there. But it's something I've thought about very, very deeply is, we can all have the will to help and the will to heal, but we really have to, what I learned is I really needed to make a very, very sound assessment about things like safety in their home environment, how drug use might spike if we start touching certain emotions. Does someone have the right resources, support, friends in their lives to support the change rather than try to block the change? There's a lot of things to pay attention to in someone's environment and conditions before we go, let's head into the core of this wound.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. And, not surprisingly, it is a common mistake that a lot of master trauma therapists have shared because it's kind of an easy one to do when, one doesn't have a lot of experience. But, so when you were doing this, you first started out by saying you were eager to help this person. Mm-hmm. And later on, as you were sharing this kind of clinical error, you said that's not enough. Mm-hmm. And I think that is a very interesting topic here for a lot of listeners. A lot of listeners are just getting into this field. Some obviously have more experience. And interestingly, when I first got into or wanted to get into trauma therapy, I knew I wanted to do this, but there was like a hesitancy I had. And I think there's a chasm in a sense that needs to be delicately crossed between, wanting to do the work and being able to do the work. And how did you bridge that gap in a sense? Was it just simply more experience and, the next client you saw, you did a more thorough assessment? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a good question. Let me say something about this topic first, and then I'll answer it for me. At this point in my work and also in training other people, I really hold a very high standard in how we assess our own competence and help each other in that way. Because, of course, good-heartedness and right-heartedness is a great place to start, but there's really a lot of deep competencies needed. And one thing that I ask therapists and practitioners is, what promises can you make your clients that within 6 months or a year or 2 years, what transformation can you promise to help them make, so that we hold ourselves to high standards? And of course, things always pop up that you don't know are going to happen, and you can shift to those promises or rearrange the timeline. But sometimes I feel like we don't actually articulate our own promises and our own like we're offering a service, and the service have to have standards connected to them. So I'm very diligent about those things now, and feel like it's important for us as a field to do that. But back to me, I luckily I love learning, and I just keep myself in learning, and I do that in different areas. So I made sure that I stayed in really good quality supervision and got a lot of feedback, and also worked the places where it was intersecting with my own work. I definitely keep myself in my own development. Like, the more I internally transform, also the more competent I am. I just understand different internal terrains differently. And then I also kept studying, and I kept studying not only in the trauma field, but I expanded it a little bit. So I made sure to keep my view wide. And one of the things that I studied a lot is, how do I understand the impact of social trauma or social oppression? That was another place that I made some mistakes. So I really widened out there, and then I really widened into resilience, and what are different ways people build resilience. Nature is one, spirituality is another, arts and culture is another. So I tried to almost in some ways keep myself exposed and keep studying across different areas, so that I almost didn't get stuck in one set of interpretations. I think when I get to the place that I am convinced I'm right, is the time to make sure I learn something that shows me that there's a lot more to learn. So was that it?
Yeah, that was kind of a perfect answer, actually. Your answers are multifaceted and multi-pronged, and I really appreciate that.
Welcome to my brain.
Yeah. So now we get to one of my favorite questions, Staci. And, we talked about the challenges and what got you to this field in a sense. I also believe it's important to really focus on why we're doing something, because the answer to that really drives us along in our work and what we do. And this is a little different than, what got you here in the first place. But share with us, Staci, your why. Why do you continue to do this work on a day-to-day basis?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good. I'm conscious that I'm going to give you a multi-pronged answer again, but I guess I'm just being myself. If I really give you the deepest answer, it fundamentally feels like my calling. It feels like what I'm built for, and the way that I can use who I am and my particularness to make the biggest contribution. So it's funny that I talked about the mountains in the beginning, because the mountains are a real spiritual home for me. And that just kind of comes back as we talk about this. I think the other reason is that I really, for me, people are really amazing. Human beings are really amazing. I find us interesting, fascinating, and odd all at the same time. But I feel like we, in trauma and in violence, we use our energy in such a wasteful way, when there's so many better ways that we can be using our energy, toward connection, toward love, toward creativity. And it feels like trauma really drives us down a path of misuse of all that aliveness, and healing helps move us toward a really great use. So there's something about that when I work with people and see them transform. It's like, oh, wow, everything is becoming much more life affirming. And that, I don't know, that just seems good, congruent, right? All those words.
Mm-hmm. So tease that out a little bit. You kind of made a distinction between, you said, we who tend to do this trauma work, there's a kind of two paths where our energies can go. Can you clarify that a little bit for us?
Yeah. What I kind of meant is actually humans in general, not even just us who do trauma healing work. But, when I look around the world or turn on the news, I go, oh my, why do we use so much of our human energy and ingenuity toward destruction? Yeah. That just seems like the wrong direction. Right. And I know that's kind of a big picture, but I think that's in some ways how my heart works around this, is that desire to have us use our ingenuity as people toward things that are more life affirming.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Awesome. Okay. So let's kind of shift gears a little. Again, many of our listeners here are therapists who don't have or don't think they have, experience working with traumatized individuals. Many individuals who are listening to this podcast are just beginning to get into the field of trauma therapy or trauma-informed care. Staci, what advice do you have for people just beginning to get into this field?
Yep. Well, all advice, I guess, is biased, so mine is going to be. What I would say is if you're interested in this field, to get yourself exposed to holistic approaches. And for me, that's somatics. When we're looking at how high-intensity experiences work in the psychobiology, so in kind of the mind, body, spirit, they really get driven into the more automatic, reactive parts of us. And a lot of our, what's called the executive functioning or the frontal lobe of the brain, gets shut down during traumatic experiences. So some of the most effective ways of helping people build resilience and process through fight, flight, freeze, appease, and dissociative responses are actually through the body. And so if you're fascinated by healing trauma, I'd really encourage people to get exposed to somatic therapies, to some of the great neuroscience and what neuroscience is revealing to us about why somatic therapies work, and to also get really fascinated about practice. And what I mean about practice is back to that first quote. It's like what we repeatedly practice builds our habits. And especially when there's been trauma, those repeated practices tend to keep reaffirming trauma survival responses. And so, trauma therapists who, like in my case, the form of somatics that I'm trained in is really informed by Aikido, but get really fascinated about practices like Aikido or Tai Chi or meditation practices that are holistic practices, include the body, mind, and spirit, that actually help reset the whole psychobiology and move us toward more, I'm trying to not use too much jargon, but what it's called is more integrated states, more resilience-based states, because it really, really helps. Understanding why we're reacting like we're reacting only goes so far, and we really need to get into a holistic approach to go, how do we transform how we're reacting so that I don't have to have that fight response over and over again, or that flee response over and over again, even when the trauma is no longer happening.
Great. Yeah, I think awesome advice. Number one, get exposed to holistic approaches, in other words, somatics, and just get fascinated. Number two, and interested in the neuroscience behind all of this and all you're talking about. And the third one, I just love it. Get fascinated about practice, and you talk about Aikido, Tai Chi, meditation, and because they really speak to how the trauma in a sense was ultimately set in, and thereby being able to heal that. I love that. Where I went to school, Aikido was a requirement. So
great.
I just love Aikido, and I just love you bringing that back into the mix in the conversation. So awesome advice, Staci. How about 2 go-to books besides Judith Herman's Trauma and Recovery, which maybe has had a major impact on the work you do or even your personal life? What would you say?
That's a good question. Richard Strozzi Heckler just put out a new book this year called The Art of Somatic Coaching. And obviously coaching and therapy are different practices, but it's a really great overview of somatics and why somatics works also beyond trauma. I think that's a great one to pick up. And then there's also, I should have had this right at hand. I might have to look it up. There's a great book of anthology that's actually about what we call social trauma. So what's the impact of living in environments that don't dignify all people? And I think we're going to have to let me look it up and stick it on your website because I don't have it right in front of me, but I was just looking at an article from it yesterday, and it's a really great anthology.
Okay, awesome. So Richard Strozzi Heckler's new book, The Art of...
Somatic Coaching.
The Art of Somatic Coaching. And then the next one we will definitely have up on the show notes page at westcoasttraumaproject.com. So talk to us about what you've got going on. Talk to us about, what you've got going on there down in Oakland.
Awesome. Great. Good. So, we have a lot going on. It's exciting. So we run year-long programs called somatics and trauma programs, and those are for therapists, actually, as well as coaches, and including folks who are doing social leadership work or social change leadership work. What we really found is, although social change leaders aren't inherently doing trauma healing work, they need to refer to people who do that more directly. They're interfacing with the impact of trauma all the time. So that's just a very exciting combination and something that I really, my heart is really in. We're also later on this year going to launch basically a network of practitioners who want to do trauma healing with communities that don't get as much access or don't have as much access to that work. I'm sorry, I have a siren going by outside. I'm sorry about the sound. It'll pass. And that I'm excited about because I think one of the things for therapists and practitioners is often because we're doing so much one-on-one work, we are alone more often. And being a part of other practitioners in a network that kind of have a joint purpose, we've just gotten a lot of positive feedback about people desiring to do that. Last thing is we're starting a group this year that's for people who run somatic-based trauma healing groups. So we're training folks to run those groups. So that's some of the fun stuff that we're up to in the future.
Awesome. I love that. So you've got this year-long course going on. That sounds awesome. And then the second thing you talked about was this
practitioner
network to help to get people into working with communities that don't normally or usually get trauma healing. How's that going to play out? What's that going to look like?
What that's going to look like is, so we have a network of practitioners already interested. Basically, there'll be kind of, you become a member of the network, and then inside of that, there will be different let's say workshops, CEU courses, things like that offered, the network itself will gather both in person and also online, so they can actually talk to each other and do anything from just peer support to supervision. And then inside of it, what we're also doing is connecting trauma practitioners and therapists to community-based organizations who serve people in basically poorer communities.
Okay.
So that link up is really important. And then any education people might need to how do they interact effectively with those communities if they're not from those communities.
Okay. So now are these therapists and or healers, are they students of the work that you do? Necessarily?
At this point, many of them are, but they don't inherently need to be.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah. Awesome. So we will have links. Is this up on your website?
It's not yet. No, it'll go up about April of next year.
Okay. We'll have links up to your website, again, on the show notes page. And in addition, contact information. So what is the best way for people to get in touch with you, Staci?
Great. So they can go to our website, which is generativesomatics.org. And you can find a link to me there. It's just Staci at generativesomatics.org. Folks can email me or contact me there. Or also the website around my book and DVD around healing sexual trauma. That website is healingsexthemovie.org. is the DVD website. So you can find me in those two places.
Awesome. All right, Staci, you have been and continue to be just so inspiring. I'm so glad I finally got you on this podcast. I know it was kind of rescheduling here and there, but thank you so much. And
absolutely.
I just really appreciate it.
You're really welcome, and thanks for doing what you're doing. I just really appreciate how you're putting this out and giving a lot of folks access to different folks. So thank you.
Well, thank you. All right. Well, take care.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye.